let's go ahead and go to our Major Garrett there, who is at his position on the North Lawn. Major, what can you tell us? A very brief statement there from the President's National Security Advisor.
Well, look, our CBSN audience saw everything that I saw. I just saw it closer. All right, I was right behind our cameraman, Victor Uola, and General McMaster, the National Security Advisor of the President, was not 5 feet in front of me. But I heard exactly what our CBSN audience heard. A categorical denial of the Washington Post reporting that at no time did the President of the United States disclose any sources or methods or anything that would be construed as highly classified information. And when there was a discussion about civil aviation, it was a general discussion about known threats, and that there was nothing about military operations discussed with the Russians that was not already publicly known. Now, this starkly contrasts what the Washington Post reported. And so now we are in a zone of interpretation. When General McMaster was walking away from the microphones, I asked him, he looked at me, hesitated, and then left, was this an inadvertent action by the President? Did he do something by accident, not intending to do it? But McMaster walked away. As he did so, other reporters said, are there notes or recordings of this to verify this account from not only H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, but the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and Dina Powell, a senior employee with the National Security Council on the Economic and National Security team. Those are the three people on the record in the meeting who say this is false. McMaster didn't take any of those questions, walked away amid quite a few questions, mine and others. So what we have is Washington Post reporting based on obviously those who were, to one degree or another, alarmed at what happened in that meeting between the President of the United States, the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, and the Russian Ambassador to the United Nations, Sergei Kislyak, and its potential ramifications for a nation who provided intelligence to the United States, and any efforts the Russians might undertake, having received this information, to, and maybe you've already discussed this term of art in the intelligence community, reverse engineer it, meaning take the information and then work it back through methods or sources to find out where it came from originally. If that were to happen, that would be, of course, very damaging to the original source, not only because of exposure, but because it might force that source to reconsider providing information to the United States in the future. All of this now falls into a zone, as I said a moment ago, of interpretation. The White House denies it, and denies it forcefully. But those who provided the information, and some of it was transcribed or appears to have been transcribed to the Washington Post, appear to have people well-sourced on this and alarmed by what they believe transpired. So that's where the story rests at this hour.
So, Major, to be clear, from a lawful standpoint, the President does, though, have the authority to declassify information. Walk us through that a little bit, and then I want to talk to you about some of the reaction from Capitol Hill.
It is within the powers of the President of the United States to declassify information, and presidents have done that on a select basis, typically with a very lengthy internal process that leads up to that, and then, and I don't have this committed to absolute memory, but I have it committed to memory during my times covering the Obama presidency, where this happened on a couple of instances. There is a public disclosure and an explanation around that declassification. I'm specifically remembering when President Obama declassified information about those who were killed by drone strikes who were Americans. And he provided more information and context in a lengthy speech about that. So when the president does this, it typically is not done in a meeting, going off script, or in a casual conversation with any visitor from a foreign country. It usually is done through an elaborate pre-process and then is explained not to a foreign visitor, a foreign dignitary, foreign minister, or ambassador, but to the American people. And if, in fact, there was any decision by the president, and now the White House suggests and states there wasn't, to declassify anything, this would have been a very unusual audience for that process to occur.
So, Major, you mentioned typically an explanation is given. What we have now are some statements from lawmakers on Capitol Hill, including Senator Mark Warner, vice chair of the Intel Committee, who says, if true of the Washington Post story, this is a slap in the face to the Intel community. Risking sources and methods is inexcusable, particularly with the Russians. From House Speaker Paul Ryan, a spokesman says, we have no way to know what was said, but protecting our nation's secrets is paramount. The speaker hopes for a full explanation of the facts from the administration. So, Major, where does this now leave the White House, particularly senior administration officials like General McMaster and others around the president who are going to be, no doubt, fielding some very passionate calls, I would guess, from lawmakers on Capitol Hill?
Well, first of all, let's just go through the last hour and a half here at the White House. The story broke. Those of us who were trying to obtain information or any kind of reaction from the White House received nothing but stony silence for a half hour, hour and a half. Many of the communications operatives who work for President Trump were huddled in Sean Spicer's office of the press secretary. They came out saying absolutely nothing. H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, at one point came out of that meeting, saw the clatch of reporters gathered outside of Sean Spicer's office and said, this is the last place I want to be, and hustled off to another meeting in the West Wing. Then it was announced that H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, would come out. This was after 3 statements, written statements, had been produced by the White House denying the story. So for H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, to come out and deliver this statement on camera indicates the seriousness with which the White House believed it had to push back on this story. Written statements to their communication strategy were insufficient. They needed something on camera, in voice, the American people could evaluate on that basis and not just written denials. So that just gives you a little bit of insight into how this has developed in the last couple of hours here at the White House. Will that answer every question? No. And there will be more inquiries from Capitol Hill about what exactly happened and what the White House is interpreting when it says nothing about sources and methods was discussed and no classified information was exchanged. There's going to be some specific questions about what the White House believes falls within or outside of whatever parameters it has created for its own understanding of sources and methods and highly classified information. And it's also worth pointing out, Elaine, this encounter had all sorts of problems with it from the start. Remember, White House reporters were not allowed access to this meeting at any level. But a photographer from the TASS state-run news agency in Russia was allowed in and snapped photographs, and they were immediately put on the internet by the U.S. embassy, Russia's embassy to the United States, giving the world a picture, literally, of the foreign minister of Russia, the Russian ambassador to the United States, yucking it up with President Trump in the Oval Office, while White House reporters and photographers were kept at a distance and not allowed to see that at all.
And Major, let's go ahead and show our viewers.
So questions of Russian access, questions of Russian access were all around this meeting even before this bombshell story, if it's true, from the Washington Post was published.
To be clear, I just want to show our viewers the pictures from that meeting. Again, to underscore, Major, your point, you are saying that United States media, reporters, photographers, during that meeting, the meeting that is now the subject of this Washington Post reporting, those pictures that we are looking at, as we see in the corner there, it says Russian Foreign Ministry. Those were the only pictures available because the White House did not allow access to reporters of that meeting. Is that correct?
Correct. No White House American reporters were allowed into that. But the TASS news agency, which is a state-run news agency in Russia, was allowed in, took those pictures, and then immediately, by no surprise, it wasn't accidental, it didn't happen inadvertently, the state-run photographer gave it to the state, Russia, and its foreign ministry, which then put it immediately on Twitter. It was almost as if, in real time, the Russians were trolling the President of the United States in the Oval Office as it was happening. It was an extraordinary moment in every way, shape, and form, something I've never seen before. at covering a White House, covering any U.S. president, and that was before this story broke. And now there is this enormous debate about what was said, what information was exchanged, and importantly, what kind of transcripts were taken of that exchange. Were they recorded? Are they on paper somewhere? Is there any kind of documentation that would illuminate and answer all questions about what was said, and importantly, now that the White House has denied this Washington Post story, what wasn't said?
All right, Major Garrett at the White House for us. Major, thanks for your reporting and thanks for that context. Appreciate it.
Sure.